Hi guys, this is part one of our bean grow along, and the beans that we're going to be looking at in this grow along are things like runner beans, are climbing beans and French beans, and then also beans for drying. So this is a variety called yin yang. Now, runner beans are 9 times out of 10 a very tall 6 to 8 foot variety of beans that do need a lot of support. You can however get dwarf varieties which are suitable for growing on large patio pots. I don't know how well they yield, I've never grown them, but there are varieties to look at if you are restricted and would really like to grow runner beans. And then we have climbing beans and French beans. Now the difference between these is the climbing beans are the pole varieties, so they're actually a tall variety, so you're looking again at 6 to 8 feet supports for these, and they will produce usually from around July all the way to your last frost when you'll need to pick these. Whereas the dwarf varieties are a much shorter plant, don't require any support sometimes, or at least very little support in comparison, usually grow to around 4 foot. And what they tend to do is harvest for around 3 to 4 week period, and all harvest much more at the same time. With any of the beans, the more we pick them, the more opportunity it is for them to continue growing and send out new flowers. But particularly with the dwarf varieties, you may want to multi-sow those to make sure that you have later supplies as well, maybe every 6 weeks or something like that, with the latest sowing being in a polytunnel or a greenhouse if you have that availability. Whereas the climbing varieties I tend to sow once and find that I get a huge yield off of these. And then we have our drying variety, like these yin yang beans. Now drying varieties are sold as such because the pods are usually not tender enough to eat, so it is the beans that we are looking to eat rather than the entire pod. However, with drying beans, it is important to remember that we can dry our runner beans and they will be absolutely fine for eating as well. And you could also dry your climbing beans and add those to soups and things like that. But any variety that is grown specifically for the bean, it is only the bean that we are going to save. For any variety that you are planning to dry, I would suggest that you have an entire area and keep those for drying types. So for climbing beans, I'll do one that we eat throughout the year, and then I'll do a separate area that I dry some for soups and things like that. And that's because if we try and wait till later, you'll usually find that actually they don't dry very well, and it is important that we get these as dry as possible on the plant. And depending on the weather, that can be harder in certain years as well to get them dry, and they do take longer than I definitely thought that they would. And then with our fresh varieties, it's important to keep picking them so we do get more of them. If you are in an area where you still have any frosts that are happening, then you either want to start these about 3 weeks before you're likely to plant them out and after your last frost, or wait until then and plant them then. They can be direct sown. What you can find with that though is that vermin pests will steal your seeds, or that the slugs will eat the very new emerging seedlings very easily. They seem to really like them, so I tend to grow them in pots. For these seeds, which are quite large, I'm going to sow into a tray like this, and that's going to be 1 seed per cell. And these are a little bit deeper than your average ones, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be deeper, but I do think it helps. You could also sow them into trays like this, and once again I'd only be putting 1 in each. They grow really fast and they put on a lot of roots, so we don't want to have too many in those cells. However, to make it easier to have as many seeds into a smaller space, I do also sow around 9 of the runner bean size beans into these, and maybe sort of 16, a little bit less, of the French bean types into this. And this is around a 3 by 3 inch pot, and then you're just going to very gently tease them apart just before you plant them. If you can't plant them out immediately, you could also at that point pot them on into larger pots. I'm also going to sow individual seeds into the soil block, which is the Mini 5, and then I'm going to multi-sow them into the Maxi 1, so exactly the same as you do into the pot, but just into soil blocks ready to be selling them. I actually plant mine into beds that haven't been overly fed, because they go in with my carrots and my parsnips, and they grow up supports from those beds, and I find that they do absolutely fantastically without lots of additional food scraps or feed that have been added. So just a layer of compost into those beds and a layer of manure into the other beds that I also have the supports on, and they've done absolutely fine. Being that these are larger beans, so these are the runner beans, these are going about an inch into the pot. And then I'm just covering back over the top with a layer of the compost. These are going to stay in my tunnel. We need a minimum temperature of around 8 Celsius for these to germinate. I'm going to put them up high to make sure that the mice can't get them, and being larger seeds, I'm going to water these from the top, so they're not going to be dislodged or anything like that. That should be absolutely fine. This one next is a climbing bean. It's tall variety. I'm just going to poke some holes and pop these seeds in. We'll see how many we get in here. These are going about half an inch down, being a little bit smaller, and then just covering them back up.